Principles of science originated in Vedas but repackaged as Western discoveries. ISRO Chairman Sri Somanath ji. Now, this is an article that went viral, and this appeared in Hindustan Times on May 25. And here the context is Somnath ji was talking at Vedic University in Ujjain, Madhya Pradesh, where he mentioned principles of science originated in Vedas but repackaged as Western discoveries. So one of a highly respected person, he asked me to verify this content and how much of this is true, and this is a video based on his request. So this is the article. It mentions that algebra, square root, concept of time, architecture, structure of universe, metallurgy, aviation were first found in Vedas, traveled to Europe through Arab countries, and were subsequently posited as discoveries of scientists of Western world. Sri Somanath ji, Chairman of ISRO, said on Wednesday. Now, to see whether how much of that is true, let us take an example of Vedic architecture at Brihadeshwara temple at Tanjavur. So you can see the size of the people here in this picture, and therefore compare how big is the temple, and you can see how much is the size of each of these bricks and what is the size of this single stone at Gopuram. So this was a temple that was built during Chola dynasty by Chola king Rajaraja, designed by Samavarma and built between 1003 and 1010 AD. So the temple has 80,000 kg stone on top of the Gopuram. So this is the 80,000 kg stone, and to place this stone here and to construct this temple with the architecture, etc., and to ensure that the temple still stands the test of the time in spite of the several earthquakes, that is a big engineering feat, and this was built in 1003 AD. But we study in our school textbooks, all the Indian children are taught in our textbook that Portuguese Vasco de Gama discovered India in 1492. Now, during 1492, when this temple with 80,000 kg stone was already built, Europeans were finding it difficult to write 80,000. For example, 8 was written as VIII, 80 was written as LXXX, 800 was written as DCCC, and 8,000, 80,000, I am not sure whether it existed during that time. And you can see how difficult it is to do any maths with when the numbers are written like this. So after 1492, the West discovers algebra, architecture, etc. So further, the article says that part of the problem, added Somnath ji, Secretary of Department of ISRO Space Commission, there was that the language the Indian scientists of the time used, Sanskrit, had no written script. It was listened to and learnt by heart, which is how the language survived. It is only later that people started using Devanagari script for Sanskrit. Now, though it is true that people listened to, learnt by heart, huge number of books, etc., and that is how the language survived, it is not true that the script was not available. And the reason I am saying that is because we have a letter from Rukmini to Krishna which is available in Srimad Bhagavatam, and specifically in the Bhagavatam it is there in 10th canto, 52nd chapter, 37th shloka onwards. Specifically, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 37th shloka says, Shri Rukmini Uvacha Shrutva Gunan Bhuvana Sundara Shrunvatam Te Nirvishya Karna Vivarair Harataunga Tapam Rupam Drusham Drushimatam Akhilarthalabham Tvayachyuta Vishati Chittam Apatrapam Me. So the context is that one Brahmin comes to Krishna's palace from Rukmini's palace carrying the letter, and this was the first shloka in that letter. And looking at the text, this specific text, we definitely know that this was not mentioned by Brahman, but this was a letter given by Brahmin. And Vedavyasa, who wrote Srimad Bhagavatam, was contemporary of Krishna. That is, he lived during Krishna's time and he authored Srimad Bhagavatam after he wrote Mahabharata. So after Mahabharata war, several years later, after he wrote Mahabharata, after several years after the Mahabharata war, he wrote Mahabharata, and then post that he writes Srimad Bhagavatam. And in it we have the mention of Rukmini princess letter to Krishna. Now, since the letter was there, we definitely know that during Vedavyasa's time there was writing in Sanskrit that may or may not be Devanagari script. Now, which was the year when this letter was written in Sanskrit? Now, we know that the Krishna, whose lineage, whose ancestors, whose children, everything is known, and since we know his ancestors and children, one of the reasons we can say is that he is not a mythical figure and lived sometime between 5561 to 3500 years before Jesus Christ. Now, this 5561 BC is based on looking at the stars, position, etc., as mentioned in Mahabharata, oceanography, and genetic science, etc. And this 3500 years is more of a traditional figure that it is mentioned that Krishna was born about 3500 years before Jesus Christ. Now, Krishna, we know his school teacher, who is Sandipani Maharshi, his classmates' works, Sudama's works, we know. The syllabus Krishna learnt, etc., is known. So, this is another condition we can assume to identify whether a particular person is mythical or actually he existed. Another condition is whether we have the literary work of such a person, and if it is, we do have the literary work, then that is one of the conditions that he is not mythical. So Krishna's actual literary work, Bhagavad Gita, is known. Krishna, whose tangible work, that is the palace he constructed in Dwarka, is still under the sea. So you can look at the work of some of the pioneers who did go under the sea to identify a palace, look at the size of the bricks in the palace, etc. Further, he says, Somnathji says, Panini is believed to be the person who wrote the rules of Sanskrit grammar. The language syntax and structure make it ideal to convey scientific thoughts and processes. Now, this is the first sutras of Panini. It starts with Shiva Sutrani, Ayun, Lruk, Aoi, Ayung, Aoch, etc. So further, so this is, all these lines are like a code in programming language, where further when he mentions ach, we should refer to the previous line, and we have to see a and we have to see ch, and then we have to assume he is referring to all the vowels between a to au. So this is, there are approximately 3995 actual 3995 sutras, and that codifies the complete Sanskrit grammar. Rather than grammar, we can use Vyakaran. The difference between grammar and Vyakaran is that based on these sutras we can also form the words. So we can form the words as well as we can form the sentences. So the medical text of Charak, surgery text of Shushruta, was written in Sanskrit. Temple architecture and engineering text was also written in Sanskrit, based on which we have seen a specific temple that was built. So these medical texts of Charak and Shushruta are even more important than the temple architecture, because whenever a war was fought between two kings, it was fought for several days. During the complete daytime the war used to be fought, and in the evening the soldiers were taken to the medical camp and their treatment was done, and it was important that a quick healing or quick surgery is done so that the soldiers can win the war in the subsequent day. They can fight the war and win the war in the subsequent day. So important was medical text of Charaka and Shushruta. These texts also exist today. Further, he says, engineers and scientists like Sanskrit a great deal. It suits the language of computers and those learning artificial intelligence learn it. Lots of research is being done on how Sanskrit can be used for computation. To be sure, much of this is still work in progress, although the narrative itself has become taller in the telling. Now, we at Shardula-ai, we have taken the first baby step to Sanskrit in computation, where newbies in Sanskrit computing are able to give commands to computer in Sanskrit to be able to create pictures. So this is a very simple language where even kids from the age group of 7 are able to use this language. And it is important that when kids at the age group of 7 to 12 are using coding, they have something very interesting, which is like creating pictures. Now, drawing pictures is a fun way to learn about geometry, coordinate system that is used in engineering of Indian temples, and it's also present in Indian astronomy. The Sanskrit computing language that is created is not a translation of keywords of any existing computer language available today. Rather, the complete fundamentals and syntax is based on Sanskrit and Sanskriti. Further, he says, Indian literature written in Sanskrit is extremely rich in its original and philosophical form. It is also important in scientific form. There is no separation of cultural, spiritual, and scientific study in Sanskrit. Now, in Parashar, which is the application Sanskrit coding language we have created, when the newbies are learning the scientific aspects of coordinate system, which is based on Indian architecture and Indian astronomy, she naturally learns the cultural and spiritual aspect, because the coordinate system is based on Indian architecture and Indian astronomy. So when he learns this, the architecture and astronomy forms the cultural and spiritual aspect. So when he learns the scientific aspects of coordinate system, the other two naturally comes to him. Findings in astronomy, medicine, science, physics, chemical science, and aeronautical science were written in Sanskrit, but they were not fully exploited and researched, he pointed out, and gave example of Surya Siddhanta, a book on astronomy that is believed to date back to 8th century. Now, being an Indian, our school textbook never mentioned anything about Surya Siddhanta, and this is the date, 8th century is the date given by the same historians who never mentioned about this in our textbook. So he further says, so I don't agree to this 8th century dating. So he says, being a rocket scientist, I was fascinated by the book in Sanskrit that talks about the solar system, time scale, and size and circumference of it. It definitely mentions all of this and even beyond that. It also mentions the complete solar system and the galaxy and further. And in our programming language, we have used Surya Siddhantas, specifically the Nakshatra Prakaranam chapter, in developing the coordinate system. So this particular line is the last line of Panini's sutra. It says Tingi Chodattavati. And the Panini's Grantha also refers to Vedic grammar, also mentions the Vedic grammar. And specifically the line 3387, the sutra 3387, he says Chandasi Punarvesvoreka Vachanam, meaning Punarvasu in Chandas or Punarvasu in Veda can be singular. And Shloka Sutra 3388 says Vishakhayoscha, meaning Vishakha as well is singular in Vedas, though it is 2 stars. So in Surya Siddhanta, Vishakha is plural, which is 2 stars. Punarvasu is plural, which is 2 stars. Punarvasu is Castor and Pollux. So when we use Surya Siddhanta, it is plural, but in Veda, it is singular. So if you like this video, do subscribe and like the channel, like the video. Do press the bell icon. We keep creating such content which is relevant for kids, specifically Indian kids, and we also believe that this knowledge will empower kids of other countries as well. So thank you. Namaste.